In this lecture, we continue on with Greece and Greek art. The last time I talked about the Bronze Age art from 3000 to 1000 BC. There's one last piece I'll talk a little bit about at the beginning, and then we'll into the Iron Age, which is basically 1000 BC. So who knows when it ends? The Steel Age or something. In any case, the adoption of iron around 1000 shows, first of all, a much greater skill with pyrotechnology and the high temperatures one's needed to, smelt iron ore. Also, iron's a lot stronger than bronze, and so it makes for much better weapons. And thirdly, iron ore is far more available than are the bronze and tin sources needed. I'm sorry, the copper and tin sources needed to make bronze, especially the tin. The tin is particularly rare. So when the adoption of iron was of iron equipment was made, extensive trade routes weren't as necessary in order to make them. So we'll talk about once again this area of Greece and primarily Athens for a while. But one last piece I want to get back to at the end of the last lecture, we were talking about the Mycenae and objects found in the grave circle, which is in the bottom of the left-hand slide. And you can see the outer area here. So when you walked in through the Lion Gate, which we have discussed, this is what you immediately saw. And so it's there to show the family that was in control there. They're buried there, their ancestors are buried there, etc. And they were very rich in finds. And one of the important finds was this dagger from there. It's called the Lion Hunt dagger because as we can see on the top there are five men attacking three lions, and one man has fallen. And we see the men using both figure eight shields and square shields called tower shields. One lion runs away, one runs away and looks back, and the other attacks. Now, on the bottom, we see a lion taking down a stag and other stags, three running away. And so this is, a sort of a metaphor for the chain of life. We hunt animals, other animals hunt other animals, etc. The technique used here is called Niello, Niello, which is an Italian word for the Nile, basically, and it's in reference to the the very dark black setting that this silver and bronze and what's called electrum are set into. Electrum is just a mixture of silver and bronze. This thing was certainly for display and never for use. But it's master craftsmanship in the Bronze Age. And first of all, it shows us correlations with frescoes when we see the shields there. The idea that there's lions in Greece was really debated for the longest time. But now that lion bones have been found at sites on the mainland, there's good reason to believe that there, in fact, were lions in the region at that time. Let's take a closer look here. We can see two figure eight shields, one from behind on the left and one from in front, or from the side, I should say. Two square or tower shields in between them. And the men shooting bows and arrows or using spears to attack the lion. This is high craftsmanship and was buried with the person. So the society could afford to basically take all this expensive metal out of circulation and give it to the royalty of Mycenae, the royalty that we see referred to on the Greek side in the Trojan War. Okay, so that will finish up the Bronze Age for us, and we'll get down into the Iron Age. One of the things that happens is that during this transition from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age, there's a short period called the Dark Ages, where the whole sort of Mycenaean and Bronze Age societies collapse. And there is a period called the Dark Ages where there's not much written, if anything at all, and the archaeology changes dramatically. But in after that, and we get a little bit into the first millennium BC, well, we get vases like this on the left called the Dipylon crater. Dipylon is just the gate at in the Agora in Athens, leading to a cemetery called the Kerameikos Cemetery. I'll talk more about that later. And this was a grave marker, basically, and it has two registers that show up the events that happen in a burial. On the bottom, there's a chariot parade, carrying the corpse. Just like we sort of have now with, at funerals, with the car caravans. On the top, we see a person laying in what's called a bier. It's a pyre. So the body is going to be burnt, and that checkered thing above it is a death shroud, but it's sort of lifted above so we can see the body. And then there are mourners on both sides with their hands to their heads, pulling at their hair, which we know from the text is what people did while mourning. And just notice that the figures are very, very geometric. It is thought that there's a good chance they probably could paint a bit more realistically than this, but this is what they liked. And we see also on the very top what's called the meander design, which we'll see more of as we go through through more Greek art. Strangely enough, these craters are actually for mixing wine and water because the Greeks mixed the two before they drank wine. But then it was used as a grave marker. And so this is called the geometric period. And we're going to go through some periods here vis-a-vis pottery, and then talk a little bit about statuary and how it progresses, from the Dark Ages down, into the 5th century BC in the next couple classes. Now, after this, we get the very famous vase by Exekias, called the Ajax and Achilles vase. The first thing you have to know is this is called black figureware. Now, the black figures, it's obvious, black figures on a red background. This will be used early on after the geometric period, and then as we'll see, it progresses where it flips around, and the figures are red against a black background. And here we see Achilles and Ajax. How do we know? Well, in fact, Exekias, in addition to writing his name on the pot, writes down their names, so we know who it is. And we can see the picture is framed by the men with their shields leaning against the wall. On the right, Achilles' helmet is off. And these are the two great warriors on the Greek side for the Greeks. And if you've read the Iliad, it is all about Achilles. And we see a symmetrical presentation here with the gaming board right in the middle there. They're playing some sort of game board, checkers or something. And they both lean over it intently to move their pieces. And we can see their spears coming down that they hold in their other hand, going down to this board. And so directing our eyes to that. And we see a great amount of symmetry in the organization. Now, what's interesting about this, too, is that this never happens in Homer. It's never referred to. And the fact that these guys might take some time off from the battlefield, which they must have just done because they still have their gear on and are holding spears, take time off to play a board game, is just, a fun little joke that Exekias is having. This event is not recorded anywhere. And so another interesting thing about this period, and it'll continue on, is we start to see identifiable mythological characters. And this will continue on. Now, after that, we get the red figure vases. And these are a bit more sophisticated than what we saw before. This is by a guy that modern art historians have called the foundry painter, because he paints this this idea a bit, and we don't know his or her name. And it shows men working at a foundry. It is a bronze foundry. It is on the bottom of what's called a kylix. It's a drinking cup. And from this, they drank wine. And we see the man on the left seated, stoking a furnace. The guy in the middle leaning on his tool, looking, observing. And then on the right, a guy hammering out a bronze statue of a body, and you can see the head in between his legs. And we can see a foot and a hand hanging from the wall, and equipment there. Now, the interesting thing here is that it's a foundry. This is where you melt, copper and and tin ore to make the bronze, and you have to have high temperatures, and so nobody's going to really be doing this naked. Even the guy on the right who has a small kilt on, it seems even that's unlikely. They would have been far better clothed. But the artist seems to be showing us that he is very good at showing the human form in various shapes, seated in front of us, standing, leaning on his tool in a position called contrapposto. I'll come back to that. And then he's good enough to paint it where the statue on the right looks lifeless. It looks like a statue rather than a body. And so it is a study of the human form. And anybody at the time would have known that nobody would walk into a bronze factory or foundry so underdressed as this. But our painter is showing off a little bit. But it's important to remember that this is red figured too. That's an important term you're going to have to know if you discuss this. So we have the geometric period, and then we have black figure, and then red figure as we progress from about 900 BC down to about 500 BC. Red figure will continue on, but we'll come back to that later. Now let's go to our statuary. And this is called a kouros. This is the word used for these naked men standing there. It just means boy in Greek, from the Archaic period. So we have a male form here. Notice how its left foot is stepping towards us. And this is a posture that they took from the Egyptians. However, unlike the Egyptians, they revel in showing the naked form, and especially the male naked form. Egyptians probably wouldn't have, there's one exception to this, one king that Pharaoh is an exception to. But in general, the only people who would be shown naked would be prisoners of war and such. This would not be the normal way you would show a pharaoh or anything like that. But the Greeks are very interested in the nude. And they revel in, the human form and the achievements of individuals. They create the Olympics to celebrate the physical achievements of humans. And here we see them starting to present the male form in a far more naturalistic way, although not completely. He is stiff, and there's great frontality to the statue, right? It looks straight at us, and arms stiffly at its side, and then its muscles molded, that is to say, sort of shaped around the stone, from the stone, and then with some minor incisions, and with braided long hair. This is another example of one. You don't have to know this one, but I show it to you because you can get an idea of the size of some of these. And, these were most likely statues of deities that would have been in temples. Interestingly enough, you can go to the places where they were quarried on the islands of Naxos or Paros and see, half-finished ones laying around. This one, the legs broke off. And so they probably just left it there, so there was no use to take it. But we can see that they were roughed out in the quarry, and then when they were taken to a workshop, they were given finer details. And here we see another example of that as well. And this guy's leg is broken off, so he was left there. and he's just in somebody's farm in some field. Right, there's a field wall right there, and so we see it in unfinished form. We do get some females as well, and this is the very famous Peplos Kore. Kore means girl, Koros means boy. And we see her dressed in an outfit called a peplos, hence its name. And that's a long dress with a sort of shirt pulled over the top here. We can see that she's missing her left arm, so this was made in pieces and attached. Great frontality to it. Interestingly enough, she has a little bit of a smile, which we call the archaic smile. We don't know what she was holding. People have argued that perhaps it's Artemis holding bows and arrows. There are other interpretations. But she also has this great frontality to her. And we're not seeing any nudes yet of females. That would not happen right now. And her braided hair comes over her shoulders and into the front. Now, there is evidence for paint on these. So here are some ideas, replicas of perhaps how it could have been painted, which are interesting. It's not for certain, other than the general design. The colors are not for certain. But what's important to keep in mind here as we go through Greek sculpture, there's a tendency to think of, that they just left their sculptures white and, to stay with the sort of, with the marble color. That's not the case. They were all painted, and they were painted in rather garish colors. But this has only been sort of discovered in recent years, and i.e. in my lifetime, or a little bit before that. But people were writing about this for centuries earlier and didn't know that they were in fact quite garishly painted. And when we get the neoclassical style that happens much, much later, like we see all through Washington, D.C., it's called neoclassical. As you know, all the buildings are white, and they thought that these things were unpainted. We now know that's not the case. We also have a Koros. This is the boy. I've mentioned Koros before. And this is called the Critias boy, because we know the name of the sculptor. He gave it to us. And this is getting into the early classical period. And we see here something really important in statuary, and that is a contrapposto stance. That is to say, one leg carries the weight and the other one doesn't. And if you walk around and watch people on campus stand and talk to each other, everybody stands like this. We don't stand as if we're at attention in the military. This is how we relax on one leg. And by the way, anthropologically speaking, bipedalism, is something in the primate class that only we have. It frees up our hands to make tools. And so standing on two legs here really does differentiate us from other primates. And we can see that the sculptor is showing the male form in more naturalistic ways and almost idealistic. I won't say almost, it is idealistic of what a fit young man should look like. His eyes would have had precious gems in them. His hair on the top is flattened out because he would have been wearing a cap. But the word to know here is contrapposto. This stance where weight's on one leg and the shoulders are slightly tilted. And this just shows a greater stage of naturalism that would occur with Greek sculptures. And we'll continue on with that. But let's talk about some architecture first. We will get wonderful stone temples from the Greeks. By the way, the early Greek colonists would go to Italy and colonize parts of it, and that's why this Greek temple is in Italy. And indeed, interestingly enough, some of the best preserved ones are there. And we see a structure with a lot of columns. We started seeing these in Egypt, and I'll also show you in a minute. These columns are a bit different. But the important thing to keep in mind is the temples used to be made out of wood. They're now made out of stone. Stone roofs are very, very, very heavy. And so they had to have many columns and rather thick columns to hold up the roof. The these will get lighter as we go through time, and the amount of columns on the front and then on the right will become standardized in later temples, which I'll discuss later on. But we see here now this transformation of wooden temples into stone temples, and these are places that house the statues. I want to emphasize that point. These are not like churches in the sense that places where we go and there's proselytization, right? Where we have to be told of the greatness of God. These were polytheistic societies, believed in many deities, and so it was no problem to add another deity and have another temple. The priests would live in there, or work in there. They would store money, even store weapons in these things. But when there's be a festival, in this case for let's say Hera, it would be outside the temple. People might walk through, but these are places to congregate around the temple. But do not think of them as places where you'd go in and be addressed by a priest. That is not the case. And once again, they had many, many deities. They were polytheists, and so people generally just accepted other gods, and they it wasn't as in our society where there's one god and it's the one we accept. But we begin to get these temples, and what happens is that what are called orders begin to emerge. And we see them here going from left to right, and this also shows us a chronological development of these temples. On the left, we see what's called the Doric order. There is no base to it, and it has, on the top, below the pediment there, on the very top, it has a capital. It's called a capital here, and this is how you're going to be able to differentiate the orders. And on the Doric order, which we'll see examples of in the future, the pediment up here has what are called triglyphs and metopes, and the sculptures in them, we'll see good examples from Athens. They are separated by these things, these three lines called triglyphs, and then the sculpted areas are pediments. Metopes, I'm sorry, the metopes. To the right, then we get what's called the Ionic order. This has a base, and it has two. The capital has these two sort of upside down volutes, as if you're looking at the side of a papyrus scroll and it's turned upside down. By the way, these represent also geographical areas, Doric being mainland Greece, Ionic being more of the west coast of what we now call Turkey, and then the Corinthian order just emerges after these. But in the Ionic order, we have these volutes in the capital, and we also have in the sculptural elements here, they are connected. They're not separated by these triglyphs, but continue on and on. And then finally, we have our Corinthian order, which has these what are called acanthus leaves, this leafy capital. Still, this has a base as well. And then it has this area in the area above the column, a continuous frieze of relief sculptures. These are all relief sculptures in this area here, not freestanding. So these are the three orders, and it's important for you to know these. Should you get a temple on an exam, you need to be able to distinguish these three orders. And I promise you can go through downtown Providence and see these various orders. If you go to DC, you see tons of them. These will jump out at you everywhere. Although modern architects don't always follow the rules, and they might put a base on a Doric order and vice versa for Ionic, etc. So these are the sort of temples that are emerging. And then something historically happens that would dramatically change or elevate to a certain extent these type of temples. And that would be that the Persian army, which was the most powerful army of the 6th century, would attack Greece. It had already, Persian being modern day Iran, It had already taken what's Afghanistan. It had gone through down to India. It had the Indus River Valley. They had taken all of the Near East and all of Egypt and modern day Turkey, and even gone into Europe. So they were spanning, 3 to 4 continents, basically. And they would attack the Greeks. By the way, I just want to show you on the right here. That's the King Darius who would attack, who would have initially attacked the Greeks. And this is described in our first history book called, on the Persian Wars by Herodotus. The Greeks were successful in repelling the Persians, and it was a real David and Goliath battle. Nobody could stop the Persians, and there was a couple big battles at Marathon and Salamis, where, to their great surprise, or to everybody's great surprise, they repulsed the Persian advance. And this would really have a great influence on the Greeks. I should really say the Athenians, because the Greeks really aren't a complete state now. That won't happen, a unified state. That won't happen until Alexander. They are city-states, a polis, Polis. We see that word in Indianapolis, right? The polis of the state of Indiana. So these are city-states. In any case, this guy attacks, fails. 10 years later, his son would attack Xerxes, also fail. But in the process of this, though, Athens would get sacked, and on the Acropolis, the Acropolis, the high city in Athens, where there was a temple to Athena, the namesake of this city, and other temples. And the Parthenon, there on the right, is an extraordinarily influential building, one of the most influential buildings in Western art, I think it's pretty safe to say. And this is a Doric temple with wonderful sculptures in it, and iconic of Greek architecture and art. And they would have a great influence on the Romans, which in turn would have a great influence on us. And we'll see variations of this theme as I go through the rest of my lectures. I just want to show you a layout of the Parthenon. There's several other buildings there, but you just really have to know the Parthenon. By the way, Parthenon means a virgin. And Athena was thought to be virgin-born, coming from the head of Zeus, and so this is dedication to her as a virgin, and also the namesake for the city. It was their primary deity. And we can also see a sort of standard of the dimensions of these temples, where the length of it is twice as many columns on the front plus one. And this would be the standard, size or proportions for the temple. We'll talk more in the next class about the Parthenon. I just want to introduce it here, one of the great temples of the ancient world. It used to have its roof. It was blown off during the Ottoman-Venetian War. The Ottomans had made the temple into an armory, and so after a couple of days of bombardment, it was hit by a Venetian, a cannonball, and blew it all up, and blew the roof off, and blew statues that were in the pediments. I'll discuss these in the next class. In the pediments, and blew them right off. And so we see it on the left as it is now. And how this got greatly preserved was a guy by the name of his name was Thomas Bruce, but he would eventually become Lord Elgin. Elgin's just a region in the in England, and he would be and because of what I'm explaining, he just did. He will do that. These marbles that we're going to study in the next class from the Parthenon are called the Elgin marbles. And basically what he did is he went to Athens and in the early 19th century and absconded with a lot of the sculptures that are from the Parthenon. So if you're a specialist in the Parthenon and studying it, you not only have to spend time in Athens, but you have to go to London and the British Museum in order to see the rest of them. Now, here's this wonderful painting of the British Museum back then. The Elgin marbles, we call them Elgin marbles now. Well, in America we do. The Brits still call it Elgin. We see a painting of them on display, and this would basically be the foundation for the British Museum. And this was at this time, the Western European countries are going around and basically looting all these ancient countries. The French are doing it, the British would do it, and building their huge museums. And so the British Museum and the Louvre in Paris are two of great museums, but they really absconded with a lot of other people's art. As a Greek friend of mine likes to say, he doesn't know why the British Museum is called the British Museum because there's nothing British in it. And to a great extent, he's right. But we'll have to go there to look at some of the sculptures in the next class. But the important thing here too is that just these marbles, what impact they had on the idea of creating these museums for the public. And we will return to that in the next class. Thank you.